The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and we have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people, Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there, ahead of them, went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Here ends the reading. Imagine if the great King Herod, described in our reading today, had learned the whereabouts of his political adversary, the little baby Jesus in the manger. Surely Herod would have assembled a military convoy. Imagine tanks, helicopters, artillery, all the things that a king enjoys showing off in his annual parades. He would have assembled these special forces, and they would have zoomed over the landscape by night. And when they spotted the little hut that held Mary and Jesus and Joseph, the helicopters would have stopped, and the special forces would have rappelled down, dressed in all black with their night vision goggles, knives on their thighs, AR-15s in their arms. Approaching the hut, they would have kicked down the door, but the whole structure would have fallen down, revealing the inhabitants within. A young mother, her slight husband, a crying child, just malnourished political refugees. And Herod would have been watching all of this miles away from the comfort of his compound on a great big screen in a boardroom. And upon seeing these three sad-looking people, he would have laughed darkly. This is it? This is what I was afraid of? And he would have ordered the men to do what they do, and they would have done it, and you wouldn't have heard about it. It happens all the time. Herod is afraid in our text this morning because he has heard that there is someone else in his land to whom others want to pay homage. And even though the story that I just told doesn't happen, even though Herod doesn't find baby Jesus, Jesus' death is foreshadowed today because some 30 years later, some ruler beneath Herod's son will find Jesus and take care of him, so to speak. And this is to be expected because as Jesus' ministry develops, people follow him and they pay him homage. And if you gather homage where there is a king, your life is endangered. Homage, that's it. People just want to bow down before Jesus. It seems like a big overreaction, but I think autocrats know what they're doing. They know that at the slightest sign of opposition, the safest thing to do is to attack aggressively. Now, this morning we're all in church, and I assume that we're all trying to be on the side of Jesus and not on the side of kings who seek out little people in little huts. So I wonder if it would be constructive to use our little bit of time together to think about what we ourselves might do to oppose tyrannical rule. So this is a political sermon. What do we do to oppose tyrannical rule? Let's pretend that Mary and Joseph and Jesus are in our midst. And over the next few minutes, let's try and come up with a plan for what we can do to protect them. What do people like us, people who are certainly more powerful than unwed teenagers who are refugees and new parents, but certainly not as powerful as Herod or the powers that be, what do people like us do to oppose tyrannical rule? Well, I've heard that people speak out to oppose tyranny. And maybe we're kind of doing that today because we are gathering around this very old story that has some clear present parallels. Mary and Jesus and Joseph were political refugees. They were homeless. They certainly would have been social pariahs, pregnant and unwed. You think their neighbors believed in the virgin birth? We come here year after year and we tell this story, this wild, controversial story, year after year. I once heard about a pastor who was facing a lot of criticism for his preaching. The problem was that he read the Bible very closely. Week after week, he read the Bible and told stories about God's love for the poor, the immigrant, the reviled, and it was downright inconvenient to the people who had to hear it every week. In their comfort, they were discomforted. And the people said, "Enough, Pastor, enough. We just want to come and have coffee." But this doesn't happen too often. We're too smart for this. We know how to arrange ourselves these days with people who think the same things. A lot of the prophetic preaching that happens in the pews today doesn't catch anyone by surprise. It is just preachers preaching to people who already think the same things and then getting fist bumps afterward. So I'm not even sure what the difference that speaking up would make, because I think that all of you are already smart enough to see the likeness that exists between the baby Jesus and the lowest of the low. I think all of you are smart enough to see the likeness that exists between King Herod and rulers who are intent on ripping families apart and killing their political opponents. So I don't think speaking out would do very much right now in this place. But could we march? What if we marched? What if right now we had a parade, we all moved down to Water Street, Hank could lead us, you could hold the baby Jesus doll that we've been gathering around for the past few weeks. The rest of Excelsior would maybe be a little bit weirded out by this. But maybe there would be some people who are already walking in our direction who would join us. "What are you doing?" they'd say. "Trying to protect the baby Jesus from murderous King Herod," we would reply. We could get coverage for this. We could call Natalie Searson from The Sun Sailor. She knows Judy Swanson. She's interviewed me before. We could get coverage. I don't think that this would be too impactful, though. It wouldn't even be politically risky. I think it would be more orthopedically risky. It's cold out. It's the winter time. Sidewalks get icy. And look at us. I'm imagining broken wrists, hips, ankles. I don't think we should march. Let's just sit down for coffee hour. What else could we do? Well, here's a wild thought. What if the more military-minded among us dusted off our weapons and used our guns to oppose whatever evil empire might emerge before us? I've heard people proposing this these days with their guns in hand. I'm not a gun owner myself. I don't really have a problem with guns. The boys at my high school loved to hunt in the fall with their guns, and I was happy for them. They loved it. I've heard that gun ownership in our country historically has some connection with the need to form a well-regulated militia, if necessary, to oppose a tyrannical government like the British. So that's maybe what we need to do, gather our guns to oppose whatever Herod arises before us. But sometimes I see men riding in big pickup trucks with a bumper sticker of an AR-15, and printed beneath the image of this assault rifle are the words, "Come and take it." And whenever I see this, I think, oh, are you and your buddies going to overthrow the government? Will you be driving around in your Silverados texting? I hate to be such a pessimist, but even with all our guns, I don't think we could do anything. I don't think we're going to overthrow the government. I just think it's dangerous, and we should look to do something else. So what else could we do? Well, maybe the Bible tells us the thing that Herod is most afraid of, the thing that rulers like Herod are most afraid of, is when people pay homage, respect, attention to someone else. And this is the small but not insignificant uprising that the wise people initiate on Epiphany. They travel across the countryside, over hills and roads, arriving finally at a very unassuming abode. This is it? They must have thought that too. And they walk in on a very unassuming family, and they bow before a helpless child. It's a private act, but somehow this private act disempowers, terrifies, haunts King Herod. Because we must imagine that such a private act organizes the mind, the life, the soul of the one who bows. Maybe you're all familiar with a version of Christianity that asks you to make a decision for the sake of your eternal soul. The tent revival type. Come on up to the altar and pledge your faith to Jesus Christ so that you don't have to burn in hell. We don't really believe that here. And as your theologian in residence and pastor, I should say that I don't think this is sound. I don't agree with the premise or the consequence of such an ultimatum. I believe that God so loves the world and that God sent Jesus to the world to save the world. So I don't think that we need to do a tent revival in order to save our souls and then overthrow Herod in some life to come. But I do think that there are moments in this life when we stand before Jesus just like the wise men do today. Jesus promises us that he is present with those who are naked and hungry and sick, present with immigrants, children, the heartbroken, present with the person beside you in the pew, present with the person with whom you share a home. Jesus is present in this world, and so is King Herod. And each of us must decide before whom we will pay homage. Amen.